Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker. A time of wooden walls, flowing rivers, and blissful ignorance. We're diving into what life was really like in medieval Paris during one of history's most terrifying sieges. Forget the romantic notions of chivalrous knights and peaceful monasteries. The truth, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love hearing from all corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 845 AD. The good news, the Seine is flowing peacefully past your workshop. The bad news, those aren't fishing boats on the horizon. The morning mist clings to the Seine like a shroud as you, Aldrig, stretch your aching back in the doorway of your leather workshop. At 32, you've already earned the respect of your fellow artisans on the Isle de la... Your hands, permanently stained brown from years of working hides, tell the story of a man who's built something meaningful in this small but growing settlement that the locals call Lutetia, though the learned men increasingly refer to it as Paris. Your workshop sits precariously close to the river's edge, built on wooden pilings that creak with every slight current change. The location isn't by choice. In a city where every square foot is precious, craftsmen like you get the spots nobody else wants. The wealthy merchants and church officials claim the higher ground toward the center of the island, while you and your fellow artisans make do with the muddy, flood-prone edges. But you've learned to love this riverside life. The constant sound of water lapping against the wooden supports has become your workshop's rhythm. Your wife, Mildred, often jokes that you work better to the beat of the Seine than to any church bell. She's probably right. There's something about the river's eternal flow that helps your mind focus on the intricate work of transforming raw animal hides into the supple leather that Paris's growing population demands. This particular spring morning feels different, though you can't quite place why. The mist seems thicker, hanging lower over the water than usual for this time of year. The birds that typically chatter from the reed beds along the opposite shore are notably quiet. Even the river itself seems to whisper rather than babble, as if nature itself is holding its breath for something momentous to unfold. You dismiss these thoughts as the fanciful musings of a mind not yet fully awake, and turn your attention to the day ahead. 3 massive ox hides await your attention, commissioned by the Abbey for new book bindings, destined for their expanding scriptorium. It's good work, steady work, the kind that pays well enough to keep your small family fed and housed in relative comfort, while building your reputation among the church officials who represent your most reliable customers. Your workshop is modest but exceptionally well organized, the result of years spent perfecting every detail of your craft. Wooden vats line one wall in precise arrangement, each filled with different solutions for treating hides at various stages of the tanning process. The smell is potent and complex, a mixture of oak bark, rendered animal fat, lime water, and something indefinably organic that marks every serious tannery. First-time visitors often wrinkle their noses and step back from the threshold. But to you, it's the scent of honest labor and steady income, as familiar and comforting as your wife's cooking or your children's laughter. The tools of your trade hang neatly from wooden pegs driven into the workshop's walls, each positioned exactly where your hands expect to find them during the focused intensity of serious work. Fleshing knives with their distinctive curved blades, each honed to razor sharpness and balanced 4 hours of continuous use. Stretching frames of various sizes, some inherited from your father, along with the secrets of their construction, others built by your own hands. As your skills developed and your understanding of the craft deepened, An assortment of specialized scrapers and smoothing stones occupies another section of wall space, tools whose specific purposes would be mysterious to anyone outside the leatherworking trade. Some remove excess fat and membrane from fresh hides, others smooth and soften leather that has completed the tanning process. Each tool represents years of patient use that has shaped both the implement and the hands that wield it. Your home sits adjacent to the workshop, connected by a covered walkway that keeps you dry during Paris's frequent spring rains and allows easy movement between domestic and professional spaces throughout the long working days that define your life. The house itself is a modest two-room structure, but it's yours, built with your own hands and the help of neighboring craftsmen who understand the importance of mutual assistance in a community where individual success depends entirely on collective stability. The main room serves as both kitchen and gathering space, dominated by a central hearth built from stones salvaged from old Roman ruins that still dot the landscape around Paris. The hearth provides warmth during the cold months and cooking fire, its chimney drawing smoke efficiently enough to keep the interior reasonably comfortable, even when outdoor fires burn continuously for professional purposes. A single window, covered with carefully prepared and oiled cloth, rather than the expensive glass that only the wealthiest merchants can afford, lets in what light the perpetually overcast Parisian sky provides. During summer months, when daylight extends late into the evening, this window illuminates your workspace adequately for detailed leather crafting. Winter requires supplementary light from expensive candles or oil lamps, adding to the seasonal costs that must be calculated into every commission's pricing. In the smaller back room, Mildred sleeps peacefully with your two children, 7-year-old Thomas and 4-year-old Beatrice. Their soft, regular breathing is audible through the thin wooden wall that separates the rooms, a sound that never fails to remind you of what's truly important in life, what you work so hard to protect and provide for, what gives meaning to the endless cycle of treating hides and satisfying customers. Thomas shows signs of inheriting your physical strength and patience for detailed work, qualities that might serve him well as your apprentice. When he reaches appropriate age, Beatrice possesses her mother's quick wit and gentle manner, traits that will serve her well in whatever role life provides for women in this changing world. Both children represent the future you're building through present sacrifice and determination. Mildred stirs as you begin moving about the main room, preparing for another day of the routine that has sustained your family through 5 years of marriage and growing prosperity. At 28, she remains the same woman who caught your eye at the marketplace, though childbearing and the hard life of a wife have added lines around her eyes and calluses to her hands that speak of shared labor and mutual dependence. She's stronger than her slight build suggests, fully capable of managing the household's complex requirements, while helping with lighter workshop tasks when your workload demands additional hands. Her understanding of leather preparation processes has grown sophisticated enough that she can handle entire stages of production independently, freeing you to focus on the most technically demanding aspects of custom commissions. Another early start, she murmurs, voice thick with sleep but carrying the affectionate familiarity of someone who knows your habits better than you know them yourself. The Abbey's commission won't finish itself, you reply, though quietly enough not to wake the children whose sleep represents the day's only period of domestic tranquility. Father Bernard wants those book bindings ready for the spring copying season. The monks have acquired new texts from Rome, and they'll need proper protection for the journey to monasteries throughout Francia. She nods understanding. The Abbey represents your most reliable customer, an institution whose needs for quality leather goods seem to expand continuously as their library grows and their influence spreads throughout the region. Maintaining that relationship requires consistent quality and reliable delivery schedules, but it provides the steady income that allows for long-term planning and gradual improvement of your family's circumstances. More importantly, the Abbey pays promptly and in silver, rather than the mixture of goods, services, and vague promises that characterizes much of Paris's economy. Silver can be saved, invested in better tools or materials, or used to purchase goods from traveling merchants who demand hard currency rather than local arrangements. As you prepare your morning meal of bread, cheese, and weak ale, you can hear the city beginning to wake around you. The familiar symphony of urban morning sounds filters through your walls, the groaning of wooden shutters opening to admit daylight, the calls of early vendors setting up their stalls in the market area, the creak and splash of cartwheels navigating the muddy streets that turn treacherous with every spring rain. Paris may not rival Rome or Constantinople in size or sophistication, but it's growing steadily, and that growth means expanding opportunities for skilled craftsmen who can adapt their services to meet changing demands. The island's strategic location makes it a natural gathering point for river trade, while its growing religious significance attracts pilgrims and scholars who create markets for luxury goods that skilled artisans can provide. The island location of your city provides natural defenses that have served the settlement well for generations, creating a sense of security that allows residents to focus on commerce and craftsmanship rather than constant vigilance against external threats. The Seine curves around the Isle de la like a protective embrace, with wooden bridges connecting to the mainland on both the north and south sides. These bridges represent both commercial lifelines and potential defensive choke points, capable of being destroyed if necessary to transform the island into an impregnable fortress. At least, that's what the city's leaders constantly assure the population during the monthly gatherings, where community decisions are discussed and defensive preparations are planned. This strategy has worked well against the various threats that periodically emerge from the surrounding countryside: bandits seeking easy targets, rival lords testing the settlement's resolve, and the occasional raid by displaced tribes moving through the region in search of new territories to occupy. The wooden palisade that crowns the island's edges adds another layer of protection to these natural advantages. Built and maintained through the collective effort of all able-bodied men in the community, it stands 12 feet high at its lowest points, and nearly 15 feet where the terrain allows for greater elevation. The wall has been reinforced with iron spikes, salvaged from old Roman ruins, creating a barrier that would require significant effort and equipment to breach. Guard posts, positioned at regular intervals along the palisade, provide elevated views of the surrounding countryside and river approaches, manned by rotating shifts of citizen volunteers who understand that their individual safety depends entirely on collective vigilance. Each post is equipped with signal horns and beacon fires that can spread warnings across the entire defensive perimeter within minutes of detecting potential threats. You've done your share of guard duty, standing watch through long, cold nights, with nothing but the stars and your fellow citizens for company. It's tedious work that cuts into valuable crafting time, but every man understands its importance. The safety of families like yours depends on maintaining constant awareness of potential dangers lurking beyond the city's protective barriers. The guard duty rotation also serves important social functions, bringing together men from different trades and economic levels who might otherwise have limited interaction. These shared watches create bonds of mutual dependence that strengthen the community's overall cohesion while ensuring that defensive knowledge and responsibilities are distributed throughout the population rather than concentrated among a small military class. This morning, however, thoughts of defense and danger seem distant and abstract. pushed aside by the immediate demands of a beautiful spring day, perfect for working hides. The sun is beginning to burn through the mist, promising clear skies and steady light that will allow for detailed work on the Abbey's commission. The spring air carries hints of genuine warmth that suggest the harsh winter is finally releasing its grip on northern France, opening possibilities for increased trade and expanded business opportunities. You step outside to check the hides you've been soaking in the riverside vats, a daily ritual that has become as automatic as breathing. The water level has dropped slightly overnight, requiring you to add fresh river water to maintain the proper concentration of your carefully prepared tanning solutions. This isn't random work. Every aspect of the process follows procedures developed through generations of trial and error, refined by your own experience and adapted to local conditions. The Seine provides excellent water for leatherworking, neither too hard nor too soft, with mineral content that enhances the tanning process without creating unwanted chemical reactions. Your father taught you to read the river's moods and seasonal changes, understanding how spring floods and summer droughts affect water quality, and adjusting your techniques accordingly. As you work, checking chemical concentrations and adjusting solutions, you notice other early risers beginning their daily routines throughout the neighborhood. Master Guillaume, the baker whose ovens provide bread for much of the island, is already stoking his fires with practiced efficiency. The sweet, yeasty smell of baking bread mingles with the earthy odors from your workshop, creating a distinctly Parisian morning perfume that speaks of productive labor and community prosperity. Guillaume's success represents one of the many small success stories that define Paris's growing prosperity. He arrived 5 years ago as a journeyman with basic skills and limited resources, but his dedication to quality and customer service has built a business that now employs 2 apprentices and provides steady income for his expanding family. His bread has become so popular that customers sometimes wait in line during busy periods, creating a neighborhood gathering point where news and gossip circulate freely. Across the narrow street, you can see Widow Margot hanging washing on lines strung between the buildings, her movements efficient despite the grief that still shadows her face. More than 2 years after her husband's death in a construction accident, she's managed to maintain their small household through needlework and laundry services, supplemented by the quiet assistance that the community provides to ensure that widows and orphans don't face starvation or homelessness. This practical expression of Christian charity benefits everyone by maintaining social stability and demonstrating that individual misfortune doesn't necessarily lead to complete disaster. The knowledge that the community will provide support during personal crises allows everyone to take reasonable risks in pursuit of improved circumstances, contributing to the overall economic dynamism that makes Paris an attractive destination for ambitious craftsmen and merchants. Margot's situation also illustrates the precarious nature of medieval life, where individual security depends entirely on personal relationships and community goodwill, rather than institutional safety nets or legal protections. Her husband's death left her with no automatic rights to his workshop or tools, no pension or insurance, nothing but the community's commitment to Christian values and practical recognition that abandoned families become everyone's problem. The sound of church bells begins echoing across the island, calling the faithful to morning prayers while marking the beginning of another day's commercial and domestic activities. You pause in your work to offer a brief prayer of gratitude for the peaceful night and divine protection, asking for continued prosperity and family safety throughout the day ahead. Religion provides more than spiritual comfort in a place like Paris. It supplies the social adhesive that binds the community together and establishes the moral framework that makes civilized life possible among people from diverse backgrounds and competing interests. The Church's teachings about charity, honesty, and mutual obligation create shared expectations that reduce conflict and enable cooperation in situations where purely secular authority might prove inadequate. Father Bernard emerges from the Abbey complex, his brown robes rustling as he walks purposefully toward the main church where morning services will soon begin. He's been a consistently good customer and has always treated you fairly, understanding that quality work takes time and deserves fair payment. The church's growing library requires a steady supply of well-crafted book bindings, and your reputation for excellence has made you their preferred supplier for commissions requiring exceptional durability and aesthetic appeal. The relationship between your workshop and the Abbey represents exactly the kind of mutually beneficial arrangement that creates prosperity in small communities. They provide steady work and reliable payment. You deliver products that enhance their institutional reputation and support their scholarly activities. Both parties benefit from maintaining high standards and meeting agreed-upon obligations, creating trust that enables increasingly complex and profitable arrangements. You return to your work, checking the progress of the hides you've been treating in carefully controlled solutions designed to transform raw animal skin into the supple, durable material that discriminating customers demand. This process cannot be rushed or abbreviated. Proper leather requires patience, attention to detail, and deep understanding of chemical processes that most people consider mysterious or magical. The 3 ox hides destined for the Abbey's commission have been soaking for exactly the right duration to remove excess fat and begin the fundamental transformation that will eventually produce finished leather. Each hide responds slightly differently to treatment, requiring individual attention and minor adjustments to achieve consistent results across the entire order. The morning progresses peacefully, with each hour bringing increased activity to the streets and workshops around you. Children emerge from homes to begin their daily tasks, carrying water from the communal wells, helping their parents with various domestic duties, or simply playing in the streets under the watchful eyes of neighbors who understand that raising children is a community responsibility rather than a purely private matter. Their laughter and chatter add a cheerful background to the general bustle of urban life, creating an atmosphere of normalcy and continuity that makes the island feel like a permanent community rather than a temporary gathering of strangers pursuing individual advantage. These children represent the future that everyone works to build and protect, the generation that will inherit whatever prosperity current efforts manage to create. Your own children will wake soon, and Mildred will begin the daily routine of preparing meals, maintaining the household, and managing the countless small tasks that keep a family functioning smoothly within the larger community structure. It's a comfortable pattern, one that has provided stability and modest prosperity for your growing family, while building social relationships that enhance security and create opportunities for mutual assistance. Thomas shows increasing interest in your work, often watching with fascination as you handle tools and materials with practiced skill. At 7, he's old enough to understand basic concepts about leatherworking while still young enough to learn proper techniques from the beginning, rather than having to unlearn bad habits acquired through unsupervised experimentation. Teaching him your trade would ensure that knowledge and skills developed over generations remain within the family while providing him with a profession that offers independence and social respect. Craftsmen like leatherworkers occupy a comfortable middle position in medieval society, above common laborers but below merchants and nobility, with enough security to plan for the future, but not so much wealth as to attract unwanted attention from those who might consider redistribution appropriate. The river continues its eternal flow past your workshop, carrying with it the occasional piece of driftwood, dead fish, or other debris that speaks of life and activity throughout the vast watershed that feeds the Seine. Fishing boats from surrounding villages move up and down the waterway, their occupants checking nets and lines for the night's catch while scanning the shoreline for opportunities to trade fish for manufactured goods produced in Paris's growing craft sector. Some of these boats will stop at the Paris market to exchange their catch for leather goods, metal tools, pottery, or textiles that rural communities cannot produce efficiently. This commerce creates the economic circulation that keeps the city alive and growing, drawing raw materials from the countryside while returning finished products that enhance rural productivity and comfort. The pattern represents a fundamental shift in how human communities organize economic activity. Instead of each settlement trying to produce everything it needs locally, specialized production centers, like Paris, can focus on developing exceptional skill in particular crafts, while relying on trade networks to supply raw materials and distribute finished goods to broader markets. Trade has been particularly good lately, with increasing demand for quality leather goods from both local customers and merchants who carry your products to distant markets throughout France and beyond. Your reputation has spread beyond Paris itself, bringing commissions from as far away as Reims and Troyes, cities whose own craftsmen lack either your technical skills or access to the high-quality materials Seine River trade makes available. This growing recognition represents years of careful attention to quality and customer satisfaction, but it also creates new challenges and opportunities. Larger orders require more sophisticated organization and potentially additional help, while distant customers demand reliability and consistency that can only be achieved through systematic approaches to production and quality control. The success also brings pleasant financial pressures. Should you expand your workshop to handle larger orders, would hiring an apprentice or partner allow you to increase production while maintaining quality standards? How much growth can you achieve before losing the personal attention to detail that created your reputation in the first place? These are good problems to have. The kind that successful craftsmen throughout the medieval world face as their skills and reputations create opportunities beyond what individual effort can satisfy. The decisions you make about growth and expansion will determine whether your current prosperity represents a temporary peak or the foundation for even greater success. The wooden walls of Paris may not be as impressive as the stone fortifications of older, larger cities, but they represent something equally valuable: a community's determination to protect what it has built together. Every plank and post has been placed by someone you know, someone who shares your investment in the city's future and security, someone whose family's welfare depends on maintaining the collective defensive arrangements that make individual prosperity possible. Walking along these walls during your guard duty shifts, you've come to appreciate both their strengths and limitations. The height and thickness provide genuine protection against casual raiders or small groups of bandits, while the elevated walkways allow defenders to observe approaching threats and coordinate responses effectively. But you've also noticed vulnerabilities that keep you awake during quiet night watches. The wooden construction, while easier to build and repair than stone, remains susceptible to fire. The island's isolation, which provides defensive advantages, also creates potential problems if enemies control the river approaches and can prevent supplies or reinforcements from reaching the city. Most concerning, the walls depend entirely on having enough defenders to man them effectively. Paris's growing population provides more people to share defensive duties, but most residents are craftsmen and merchants with limited military experience. In a serious crisis, would courage and determination prove sufficient to compensate for lack of professional training and equipment? As midday approaches, the mist has completely cleared, revealing a bright spring sky dotted with white clouds that promise a beautiful day for working outdoors. The Seine sparkles in the sunlight, its surface broken by the wakes of passing boats and the occasional fish jumping for insects attracted to the warming water. It's exactly the kind of day that makes you grateful to be alive, healthy, and living in one of the most prosperous and secure settlements in northern France. The combination of natural beauty, productive work, and family contentment creates a sense of complete satisfaction with life's current arrangements. You pause in your work to share a simple but satisfying meal with Mildred and the children, gathered around the wooden table that represents one of your first major purchases as a married man. Thomas chatters excitedly about a wooden sword that one of the neighbor boys has carved, describing elaborate battles against imaginary enemies with the boundless enthusiasm that makes childhood such a source of joy for parents. Beatrice focuses intently on her bread and honey, approaching eating with the same serious concentration she brings to all activities. At 4, she already shows signs of the intelligence and determination that will serve her well, regardless of what opportunities life provides for women of her generation. These quiet family moments represent the real treasure that all your work and planning aim to protect. The leather, hides, tools, and accumulated silver have value only insofar as they contribute to creating and maintaining these experiences of simple happiness shared with people you love completely. The afternoon promises to be highly productive. The hides are responding well to treatment, showing the gradual transformation that indicates the tanning process is proceeding according to plan. With steady work and careful attention to detail, you should be able to begin the next phase of preparation before evening, potentially finishing the Abbey's commission ahead of schedule. Early completion would likely earn you a bonus payment while strengthening your relationship with your most important customer. Father Bernard has mentioned plans for additional book acquisition, suggesting that future commissions might be even larger and more profitable than current work. Such possibilities justify the long hours and careful attention that quality leatherwork demands. Building a reputation for exceptional skill and reliability takes years of consistent performance, but it creates the foundation for sustained prosperity that can support family ambitions, community involvement that mere survival cannot provide. Life in Paris isn't easy by any standard, but it's undeniably good compared to alternatives available to people of your social class and economic circumstances. The combination of natural defenses, growing trade opportunities, and strong community bonds has created something special on this island in the Seine, something worth protecting and working to improve. Your children will grow up with opportunities you never had as a village craftsman's son, while their children will inherit an even more prosperous and secure city built on foundations that current efforts are establishing. Each generation's work contributes to a future that extends far beyond individual lifespans, creating something larger and more enduring than any single family could achieve alone. The sound of voices from the riverside draws your attention away from these comfortable thoughts about future prosperity. A group of fishermen has gathered near the water's edge, pointing and gesturing toward something upstream with obvious concern. Their voices carry a note of urgency that seems oddly out of place on such a beautiful, peaceful day. You set down your tools and walk toward the commotion, curiosity overcoming your dedication to maintaining productivity schedules. The fishermen are local men you've known for years. Practical people, not given to unnecessary excitement or unfounded alarm. If something has caught their collective attention, it's probably worth investigating rather than dismissing as idle speculation. Claude, the oldest and most experienced of the group, has spent 40 years learning to read the person's moods and understanding the significance of unusual activity on the water. His knowledge has saved lives during spring floods and helped predict weather changes that affect everyone who depends on river transportation for business or survival. "What's the matter, Claude?" you ask, joining the group of men who continue staring upstream with expressions that combine curiosity and growing unease. He points toward the eastern horizon, squinting against the bright sunlight reflecting off the water's surface. "Ships coming down from the east," he says slowly, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone who wants to be certain of his observations before making definitive statements. "More than I've ever seen on the river at one time." You follow his gaze, shading your eyes with your hand while scanning the familiar stretch of river that curves away toward the distant countryside. At first, you see nothing unusual, just the normal vista of water, shoreline, and scattered vegetation that has remained essentially unchanged throughout your lifetime. Then, gradually, you begin to make out what has captured the fisherman's attention and concern. Dark shapes on the water, still distant but clearly moving in your direction with purposeful coordination. Not the single vessels or small groups that typically navigate the Seine for commercial purposes, but what appears to be a substantial fleet of boats moving together in organized formation. "Probably merchants," suggests Pierre, another fisherman whose optimistic nature usually leads him to assume the best about ambiguous situations. "Spring trading season starting early this year. Maybe they heard about our growing prosperity and want to establish business relationships before the main commercial period begins." But his voice lacks conviction, and Claude shakes his head slowly. The gesture of someone whose experience suggests that optimistic explanations rarely prove accurate when applied to unusual developments that can't be easily categorized. "I've been watching this river for 40 years, Claude says firmly, "and I've never seen merchant vessels move like that. Too organized, too purposeful. Look at the way they're arranged in formation, maintaining specific positions relative to each other as they navigate the river's curves." You study the approaching fleet more carefully, beginning to understand Claude's concern as details become clearer with closer observation. These boats aren't scattered randomly like a collection of independent traders would be. They're moving in deliberate formation, maintaining precise spacing and coordinated movements that speak of central command and unified purpose. The formation itself suggests military organization rather than commercial convenience. Merchant vessels typically spread out to take advantage of favorable currents and wind conditions, while these boats seem more concerned with maintaining tactical positioning than optimizing individual navigation efficiency. "How many do you count?" you ask, though the distance makes accurate counting impossible even for someone with excellent eyesight. "Hard to say exactly," Claude replies, continuing to study the approaching fleet with the focused attention of someone trying to extract maximum information from limited visual evidence. "But certainly more than 20 vessels. Could be twice that number, maybe more." The distance makes it difficult to distinguish individual boats from the overall formation. The other fishermen murmur agreement, their earlier casual interest replaced by growing unease as the implications of Claude's observations become clear. Large fleets don't appear on the Seine without specific reasons, and those reasons are rarely beneficial for small communities that depend on peaceful conditions for their prosperity and security. The size alone suggests capabilities that go far beyond normal commercial or transportation purposes. 20 boats might represent a large trading expedition. 40 or more suggests something else entirely: organized migration, military expedition, or coordinated raiding that requires resources and planning beyond what individual entrepreneurs typically command. "Should we alert the guards?" asks Jean, the youngest fisherman present. a boy barely old enough to handle a boat alone, but already showing the good judgment that makes him a valued member of the river community despite his limited experience. Claude considers this question carefully, weighing the potential benefits of early warning against the risks of causing unnecessary alarm based on observations that might prove benign. False alarms can damage credibility and create skepticism that interferes with genuine emergencies. But delayed warnings can prove catastrophic if threats materialize faster than defensive preparations can be organized. Probably wise, he says finally, his decision reflecting the practical wisdom that values caution over optimism when family safety might be at stake. Even if it turns out to be nothing more than an unusually large trading expedition, better to have the guards aware and prepared than to be caught unprepared if the situation develops in unexpected directions. You nod agreement, though part of you hopes desperately that this will prove to be nothing more than an unusual but harmless commercial development. Your family's comfortable routine, your carefully built business relationships, your detailed plans for future expansion, all of these depend on the continued peace and prosperity that Paris has enjoyed for years. Disruption of any kind would threaten the delicate balance of relationships and expectations that makes your current success possible. Even temporary interruption of trade could damage customer relationships that have taken years to build, while prolonged disturbance might force you to abandon accumulated progress and start over in a different location with different circumstances. But, as you continue watching the distant fleet maintain its steady approach down the Seine, you can't shake the growing feeling that this beautiful spring day may be remembered for reasons that no one currently wants to contemplate. The morning that began with such promise and productivity may mark the end of an era rather than another step toward the prosperous future you've been building so carefully. The afternoon sun that seemed so welcoming and energizing an hour ago now feels different, casting shadows that appear longer and darker than they should at this time of day. The river that has always been your friend and ally, providing water for your tanning process and transportation for your business, suddenly seems like a highway carrying unknown dangers directly toward your family and community. You return to your workshop, but concentration proves impossible despite your professional commitment to meeting deadlines and maintaining quality standards. The familiar rhythm of your work has been broken by uncertainty and growing concern that penetrates every attempt to focus on immediate tasks. Through your window, you can see neighbors gathering in small groups throughout the district, their conversations animated by the same unease that's affecting your ability to work productively. Word of the approaching fleet is spreading through the community with the speed that characterizes all significant news in small, closely connected settlements. Mildred notices your distraction immediately, setting aside her own work to give you the focused attention that years of marriage have taught her to provide. When circumstances require serious discussion rather than routine domestic interaction. "What's troubling you?" she asks, her voice combining concern with the practical calmness that makes her such an effective partner in both domestic and business matters. You explain what you've observed and heard, trying to keep your voice measured and objective while conveying the substance of the fisherman's concerns. No point in creating unnecessary alarm, especially when the approaching fleet might prove to be completely harmless despite its unusual appearance and organization. But Mildred has lived on the river long enough to understand the implications of Claude's observations without requiring detailed explanation. Her face grows serious as she considers what you've told her, reflecting the same progression from initial optimism to growing concern that you've experienced yourself. "Perhaps we should visit your sister in Mo," she suggests quietly, her words carrying the practical wisdom of someone who prefers prudent caution to optimistic assumptions. When family safety might be at stake, just for a few days, until we know what these boats represent and what their intentions might be regarding our community. The suggestion is tempting, offering a simple solution that would remove your family from potential danger while allowing you to observe developments from a safe distance. Mo is only a day's journey by road, close enough for rapid return if the situation proves benign, but far enough to provide genuine safety if serious trouble develops. But abandoning your workshop and customer commitments would mean potential financial disaster, especially with the Abbey's commission at a critical stage that requires daily attention to ensure proper completion. Your business depends on reliability and prompt delivery, qualities that distinguish professional craftsmen from casual workers and justify the premium pricing that makes prosperity possible. Missing Father Bernard's deadline would damage your reputation throughout the religious community, potentially costing you future commissions that represent the foundation of your long-term financial planning. Word of unreliability spreads quickly among institutional customers who can afford to be selective about their business relationships. Let's wait and see what develops, you say, though the words feel inadequate even as you speak them. Maybe the guards will have more information soon, or the approaching boats will clarify their intentions through direct communication rather than forcing us to rely on speculation and assumption. The remainder of the afternoon passes slowly, with work productivity severely hampered by constant glances towards the river and frequent interruptions from neighbors seeking news or sharing rumors about the mysterious fleet. The approaching boats have become the island's primary topic of conversation, spawning dozens of theories about their origin, purpose, and potential impact on local conditions. Some optimists continue insisting that the vessels must be carrying trade goods, or perhaps refugees from some distant conflict that has displaced peaceful populations seeking new homes in more stable regions. Others point out that legitimate merchants would typically send advance notice of such large expeditions, allowing local officials to prepare proper reception facilities and establish appropriate trading protocols. The pessimists, unfortunately, make increasingly compelling arguments as more details become available through continued observation. Large fleets moving in military formation rarely bring good news for settled communities like yours, especially when they appear without warning or advance communication about their intentions and requirements. History provides numerous examples of prosperous towns that welcomed what appeared to be legitimate traders, only to discover too late that their guests had conquest rather than commerce in mind. The distinction between trading expedition and raiding party often becomes clear only after the visitors have established positions that make resistance impossible. As evening approaches, the distant ships have grown noticeably larger and more distinct, transforming from abstract dark shapes on the horizon into clearly recognizable individual vessels. What seemed like vague threats based on fishermen's speculation now resolves into concrete reality that confirms rather than alleviates the growing concerns. Each boat appears large enough to carry substantial crews and cargo, suggesting capabilities that go far beyond simple transportation or small-scale trading. The vessels themselves look different from typical Seine rivercraft, longer and narrower, with distinctive profile characteristics that suggest foreign origin and specialized purpose. Most concerning, the fleet continues maintaining precise formation despite navigating river sections that would normally require individual boats to adapt their positioning for obstacles. This level of coordination suggests extensive experience working together under unified command. Exactly what you would expect from military or raiding expeditions rather than commercial ventures. The city guards have been alerted and have taken positions along the riverside palisade, their presence both reassuring and ominous. If the approaching fleet truly represented no threat to community safety, such defensive preparations would be unnecessary. The guards' obvious concern validates, rather than calms, civilian anxiety about potential developments. You secure your workshop for the night with unusual care, taking extra time to lock away valuable tools and materials in hidden locations that might escape casual inspection. If trouble comes to Paris, craftsmen's workshops will be among the first targets for raiders seeking portable wealth that can be easily converted to personal advantage. Your most valuable tools disappear into carefully prepared hiding places, some buried beneath the workshop floor, others concealed within walls or roof spaces that appear solid to casual inspection. The silver coins that represent your family's accumulated savings go into a leather pouch that Mildred will carry on her person. The only security available in circumstances where conventional storage might prove inadequate. These preparations feel surreal, disconnected from the peaceful routine that has defined your life for years. Yesterday, your biggest concerns involved meeting customer deadlines and managing seasonal fluctuations in hide prices that required minor adjustments to business planning but posed no fundamental threats to family security. Now you're contemplating the possibility of losing everything you've worked to build, potentially including your family's lives if the approaching threat proves as serious as growing evidence suggests. The transformation from comfortable prosperity to desperate uncertainty has occurred within the span of a single day, a reminder of how quickly medieval life can change when external forces beyond local control decide to assert themselves. Dinner with your family proceeds normally on the surface, but underlying tension affects everyone's appetite and conversation. Despite attempts to maintain familiar routines, Thomas asks repeatedly about the boats on the river, his child's natural curiosity battling against the adults' obvious worry about implications that remain unclear but increasingly ominous. Beatrice seems to sense the general unease without understanding its source, staying closer to her mother than usual and watching the adults' faces for clues about whether her small world is about to change in ways that might affect her daily routines and sources of security. After the children are settled for the night, you and Mildred discuss contingency plans in hushed tones, trying to prepare for possibilities that you hope will prove unnecessary, but can't afford to ignore given the potential consequences of inadequate preparation. Where would you go if evacuation becomes necessary? Your sister's home in Mo remains the most obvious destination, but getting there would require crossing territory that might be controlled by hostile forces if the approaching fleet represents a coordinated invasion rather than an isolated incident. What essential items could you carry during hasty departure? Food, water, basic tools, whatever silver you can transport safely, essential clothing for changing weather conditions. Everything else would have to be abandoned to whatever fate awaits abandoned property in occupied territory. How quickly could you be ready to leave everything behind? The question haunts your planning, because the answer depends entirely on how much warning you receive before departure becomes necessary rather than optional. Minutes, hours, or days of preparation time would determine what can be saved versus what must be sacrificed. These conversations feel disconnected from reality, discussing scenarios that seem too dramatic and unlikely to apply to your peaceful, prosperous community. Yet, the approaching fleet represents concrete evidence that dramatic change remains possible, despite years of stability and gradual improvement that suggested a predictable future. The night brings little rest, despite exhaustion from emotional stress and unproductive anxiety about situations beyond your control. You lie awake, listening to unusual sounds from outside, the calls of guards communicating along the palisade, the creak of wooden beams as neighbors peer from their windows, the distant splash of oars as patrol boats check the river approaches for signs of immediate threat. These sounds create an atmosphere of vigilant preparation that makes sleep difficult even for someone accustomed to the normal night sounds of urban life. The knowledge that your community is preparing for potential conflict transforms familiar surroundings into something that feels temporary and vulnerable. Dawn comes both too early and too slowly, bringing answers to questions that have tormented the community through sleepless hours of speculation and worry. Whatever the approaching fleet represents, this day will reveal their intentions and determine whether your preparations prove necessary or merely prudent precautions against threats that never materialize. You rise before first light and immediately check the river, hoping against hope that the mysterious vessels will have disappeared during the night or revealed themselves as the harmless trading expedition that optimists continue to hope they represent. Instead, what you see destroys any remaining illusions about the fleet's peaceful intentions. The ships are much closer now, close enough to make out details that confirm your worst fears while revealing additional threats that previous distance had concealed. These aren't merchant vessels or refugee boats carrying displaced families seeking new homes. They're warships, long and narrow, with multiple rows of oars and distinctive dragon-carved prows that mark them unmistakably as belonging to the fierce northern peoples who have been raiding coastal settlements with increasing frequency and growing boldness. Vikings. The word spreads through Paris like wildfire as dawn reveals the approaching fleet in all its terrifying detail. More than 100 ships, each clearly designed for warfare rather than commerce, each carrying crews that could number 50 warriors or more, moving with the disciplined precision that speaks of experienced raiders who have conducted this type of operation many times before. The peaceful morning that should have begun another productive day in your comfortable routine has instead become the opening scene of what might be your family's final chapter. The river that has fed your city and supported your livelihood has delivered the greatest threat Paris has ever faced directly to your doorstep. And as you stare at the approaching dragon ships, counting their numbers and calculating their implications, one truth becomes absolutely clear. There's nowhere to run. The dragon heads carved into the prows of the approaching vessels seem to stare directly at you as they cut through the morning mist with predatory efficiency. You count them obsessively, as if knowing the exact number will somehow make the overwhelming threat more manageable or provide insight into defensive strategies that might prove effective against such force. 120 ships. The number burns itself into your consciousness as you recount again and again, hoping that somehow your initial assessment was wrong. That fear and distance had multiplied the actual threat beyond realistic proportions. But each recount confirms the devastating reality. This isn't a raid, it's an invasion. The mathematics are simple and absolutely terrifying. Even if each ship carries only 30 warriors, a conservative estimate given the vessels' obvious size and military purpose, that means 3,600 armed raiders bearing down on a city whose entire population barely exceeds that number when you include women, children, and elderly residents who cannot contribute to defensive efforts. But these ships are significantly larger than typical coastal raiding vessels. designed clearly for extended campaigns, rather than quick strikes followed by rapid withdrawal to safe bases. They could easily be carrying twice your conservative estimate, potentially fielding an attacking force that outnumbers Paris's total population by 2 to 1 or worse. Your hands shake as you secure the last of your valuable tools in the wooden chest you've hidden beneath your workshop floor, covering the hiding place with loose planks and scattered debris that might escape casual notice during the systematic looting that will inevitably follow the city's fall. Everything you've built, everything your family depends on, everything that defines your place in the world sits vulnerable on this island with nowhere to retreat and no possibility of effective resistance. The tools represent more than mere implements for working leather. They embody years of accumulated skill, knowledge passed down through generations, and the foundation for any future attempt to rebuild your life in different circumstances. Losing them would mean starting over not just financially, but professionally. Reduced to common laborer status without the specialized capabilities that provide independence and security. Mildred moves through the house with grim efficiency, packing essential items into bundles that can be carried quickly if evacuation becomes possible. Though both of you understand that evacuation from an island surrounded by hostile naval forces represents fantasy rather than realistic option. Her face shows the same controlled fear you feel, not panic, which would be useless, but the sharp-edged terror of someone who understands exactly how precarious their situation has become. Her preparations follow priorities established during last night's planning session: food that won't spoil quickly, water containers that can be refilled from wells or streams, basic medical supplies, essential clothing for changing weather conditions, and whatever silver can be transported, without creating obvious evidence of portable wealth that might attract unwanted attention. But underlying these practical preparations is the unspoken knowledge that packing represents psychological comfort rather than realistic preparation for survival. If the Vikings take Paris, they'll control everything and everyone on the island. Escape would require miracles that rational planning cannot anticipate or prepare for effectively. "Papa, why are you hiding your tools?" Thomas asks, his 7-year-old mind struggling to process the adult anxiety that fills every corner of their home with tension that he can sense, but not understand fully. You kneel beside your son, choosing words carefully while trying to maintain the parental authority and confidence that children need, even in circumstances that terrify the adults responsible for providing security and guidance. Sometimes visitors come who don't understand the value of honest work. You say, hoping the explanation will satisfy his curiosity without requiring detailed discussion of concepts that no child should have to contemplate. "We're just making sure our important things stay safe until the visitors leave." It's not exactly a lie, but it feels inadequate given the magnitude of what you're actually trying to explain. How do you prepare a 7-year-old for the possibility that everything he's ever known might disappear before the sun sets? How do you help him understand threats that you can barely comprehend yourself? Thomas nods seriously, accepting your explanation with the trust that children place in parents who have always provided accurate information about their world. But his eyes show confusion about why tool hiding should be necessary. If the visitors are merely unfamiliar with craftsman traditions rather than actively hostile to productive labor. The sound of running feet echoes from the street outside, growing louder as more people join the desperate movement toward whatever safety the island's center might provide. Through your window, you can see neighbors rushing past with hastily assembled bundles, driving livestock ahead of them, carrying children too small to keep pace with adult urgency. The sight transforms your family's private crisis into community catastrophe, confirming that everyone faces the same impossible situation rather than isolated misfortune that might be resolved through individual action. The evacuation you've been dreading has begun, though nobody seems certain about destinations or objectives. Beyond general movement, away from the riverside areas where Viking landing parties will establish their initial footholds, Father Bernard appears at your door. His usual calm demeanor cracked by obvious strain that reveals how thoroughly the approaching crisis has shattered even religious confidence in divine protection. His presence provides some comfort, but his obvious fear confirms rather than contradicts your assessment of how serious the situation has become. Aldrich, the Count, is ordering all able-bodied men to the palisade, he announces, his voice carrying the authority of someone conveying official instructions rather than personal requests. We're going to make a stand against these raiders, try to hold them at the walls until help can arrive from the mainland. The words hit you like cold water, forcing you to confront the reality that has been lurking beneath conscious awareness since you first saw the approaching fleet. A stand against thousands of seasoned Viking warriors who have been perfecting the art of siege warfare for generations. With wooden walls hastily constructed by part-time citizen volunteers and defended by craftsmen who drill perhaps once per month during peaceful times, the disparity between defenders and attackers goes beyond simple numbers to encompass fundamental differences in experience, equipment, training, and tactical knowledge. The Vikings approach Paris as professionals conducting routine work they've performed dozens of times before. The defenders must improvise responses to situations they've never faced using skills they've never needed to develop. What about the women and children? You ask, though you already know the answer from Father Bernard's expression and the grim reality of Paris's strategic situation. The bridges have been destroyed as planned, he says quietly, confirming the defensive strategy that transforms the island's greatest advantage into its most serious vulnerability. We're hoping the river and our walls will be enough to hold them, but he doesn't finish the sentence because completing the thought would require acknowledging possibilities that neither of you wants to discuss explicitly. The bridges that normally provide escape routes have been eliminated to prevent enemies from using them to bring reinforcements or heavy equipment onto the island. But this decision also traps everyone currently on the island, making evacuation impossible regardless of how desperate circumstances become. Mildred appears at your shoulder, having heard every word of the conversation that determines how your family will face the approaching crisis. How long do we have? She asks, her voice steady despite circumstances that would justify panic or hysteria. Father Bernard glances toward the river, where the dragon ships continue their relentless approach with mechanical precision that suggests extensive experience conducting similar operations. An hour, perhaps 2 at most. They'll need time to organize their forces and study our defenses before launching coordinated attacks. But they're clearly not planning to negotiate or make demands that might be satisfied peacefully. 2 hours, the phrase echoes in your mind like a death sentence, reducing your entire future to a period shorter than a normal morning's work. 2 hours to say goodbye to the life you've built together, to prepare for transformation that will either end in death or slavery, to compress a lifetime's worth of love and regret into moments that must carry the weight of everything you should have said or done differently. You look at your wife, seeing your own thoughts reflected in her eyes, the desperate desire to find solutions where none exists. The need to maintain hope despite overwhelming evidence that hope serves no practical purpose. The love that makes separation unbearable even when staying together guarantees shared destruction. Go, Mildred says firmly, her voice carrying the strength that has sustained your family through previous difficulties and now provides the courage needed to face circumstances that dwarf all previous challenges. Do your duty to the community. We'll manage here as best we can. The kiss you share feels like every kiss you should have given her over the years but didn't, compressed into a single moment that carries the weight of all your unspoken love and accumulated regret. When you finally pull away, you memorize her face with desperate intensity, storing every detail against the possibility that this memory will have to last forever. Her eyes, still bright despite the fear that shadows them. The curve of her mouth, which has smiled at your jokes and whispered comfort during difficult times. The way her hair catches the morning light, creating highlights that make her beautiful in ways that transcend physical appearance and speak to the soul connection that marriage at its best can provide. Thomas clings to your leg as you prepare to leave, his child's intuition finally grasping that something terrible is happening. Despite adult attempts to maintain normalcy and protect him from fears that exceed his ability to process constructively. I want to come with you, Papa, he says, with the fierce determination that makes him your son rather than just a small person who happens to live in your house. I can fight too. I'm not afraid of visitors who don't understand honest work. You lift your son, holding him tight against your chest while feeling his heartbeat against yours. Two rhythms that have synchronized during countless moments of shared affection and daily routine. At 7, he's already showing signs of the physical strength and moral determination that you hope will serve him well in whatever world emerges from this day's events. Your job is to protect Mama and Beatrice, you tell him solemnly, placing on his small shoulders a responsibility that no child should have to bear but that circumstances make necessary. That's the most important fighting there is, more important than standing on walls or carrying weapons. Can you do that for me? He nods seriously, squaring his shoulders under the weight of adult responsibility while trying to project confidence. He doesn't feel but knows is expected of someone who has just been entrusted with family leadership during crisis conditions. It's too much to ask of a 7-year-old. But these circumstances demand impossible things from everyone, regardless of age or preparation. If he survives what's coming, this moment will define how he understands duty, courage, and the sacrifices that family relationships sometimes require from people who would prefer to remain safe and comfortable. Beatrice watches the entire scene with wide eyes, her 4-year-old mind processing emotional dynamics that she can't understand but clearly recognizes as fundamentally different from normal family interactions. Her silence suggests the intuitive understanding that sometimes develops in young children when adult behavior signals that familiar lay routines have been suspended by circumstances requiring different responses. You gather your weapons, a sturdy oak staff that has served for years as both walking stick and tool handle, a long knife designed for leather work but capable of causing serious injury in close combat, and a small axe used for splitting wood that could prove deadly in desperate circumstances. The arsenal represents improvised military equipment rather than professional soldiers' gear. But it's what's available to craftsmen, pressed into defensive service. The weapons feel strange in hands, accustomed to working leather rather than threatening human life. But necessity creates familiarity with tools and purposes that peaceful times never require. The staff's weight and balance, the knife's edge and grip, the axe's momentum and cutting potential all become relevant considerations in circumstances where survival might depend on effective violence rather than skillful craftsmanship. You join the stream of men heading toward the palisade, leaving behind everything that matters most to defend what can probably not be defended successfully. Your neighbors' faces show the same mixture of fear and determination that you feel. Ordinary people, forced by extraordinary circumstances to attempt things that exceed their preparation and experience. Master Gig'em walks beside you, his baker's strength evident in broad shoulders and powerful hands that suggest he might prove effective in hand-to-hand combat despite lack of military training. His presence provides comfort, reminding you that you won't face whatever comes alone, but as part of a community that has chosen collective resistance over individual surrender. Behind him, you recognize Thomas, the blacksmith, whose work with hammer and anvil has developed the kind of physical power that could prove devastating in close quarters fighting. His tools include weapons more effective than your improvised arsenal, and his understanding of metalwork might prove valuable if defensive equipment needs repair or modification during extended siege conditions. Other craftsmen make up the defensive force: carpenters, whose knowledge of construction might help repair wall damage, masons, who understand fortification principles, merchants whose travels have exposed them to different fighting techniques and strategic concepts. Each man brings specialized knowledge that could contribute to collective defense, despite lack of formal military training. The view from the palisade takes your breath away in the worst possible sense, confirming fears while destroying any remaining hope for peaceful resolution. The Viking fleet has organized itself into attack formation, perhaps 500 yards downstream, close enough to make out individual figures moving on the decks while they complete final preparations for assault. The morning sunlight gleams off metal weapons and armor, creating a display that might be beautiful if it weren't so absolutely terrifying. Hundreds of warriors visible just on the nearest ships, each one representing years of training and experience in exactly the kind of warfare that Paris must now attempt to resist using improvised methods and amateur soldiers. The Vikings' equipment advantage becomes clear even at distance. Professional armor, specialized weapons, siege equipment designed specifically for reducing fortified positions like yours. Everything about their appearance and organization speaks of systematic preparation for conducting siege operations against communities exactly like Paris. Count Ragnar stands at the center of the defensive line, his presence both inspiring and sobering given what his leadership position reveals about Paris's desperate situation. As the highest-ranking noble resident on the island, he's assumed command of the defense, though his military experience consists mainly of ceremonial duties and occasional border skirmishes against lightly armed bandits. His armor represents the best defensive equipment available to your foresister, mixture of leather and metal pieces that might deflect glancing blows but wouldn't provide reliable protection against determined attack by professional warriors equipped with weapons designed to penetrate such protection. Men of Paris, he calls out, his voice carrying clearly along the wooden battlements. Today we face a test that will determine the fate of our city, our families, and our way of life. These raiders have come expecting easy victims and quick plunder, but they'll find instead the fierce hearts of free men defending their homes and everything they hold dear. The speech is stirring, carefully crafted to inspire courage while acknowledging the gravity of what everyone faces. You find yourself standing straighter despite the circumstances, feeling genuine pride in belonging to a community that chooses resistance over submission, even when the odds suggest that submission might offer better survival prospects. Around you, fellow defenders grip their weapons more firmly and scan the river with renewed determination. drawing strength from shared commitment to principles that transcend individual self-interest. Whatever happens in the coming hours, it will happen to men who chose to fight for their families and community rather than accepting slavery or death without resistance. But inspiring speeches don't change mathematical realities. And the numbers remain brutally unfavorable despite increased morale and collective determination. You count perhaps 300 men along the palisade, many of them craftsmen like yourself, with limited combat experience and improvised equipment that can't match professional military gear. Facing them across the water are thousands of professional warriors, whose entire lives have been dedicated to exactly this kind of warfare. Men who have conducted successful sieges against dozens of communities, who understand siege techniques developed through generations of raiding experience, who possess equipment specifically designed for reducing fortifications and overwhelming defensive forces. The disparity goes beyond simple numbers to encompass fundamental differences in preparation, experience, and strategic understanding. The Vikings approach this battle as routine work that they've performed many times before. The defenders must improvise responses to situations they've never faced using skills they've never needed to develop under pressure. The Vikings begin their approach with methodical precision that speaks of extensive experience conducting similar operations against similar targets. The lead ships move slowly, allowing crews to study the defensive preparations while identifying weak points in the palisade that might be exploited during the main assault. Their reconnaissance reveals professional understanding of siege principles that your amateur defenders can barely comprehend. They note the height and thickness of different wall sections, estimate the number of defenders based on visible activity, and identify positions that might provide advantageous angles for siege equipment or scaling attempts. Behind the reconnaissance vessels, the main fleet maintains formation with mechanical precision, ready to exploit whatever opportunities the advanced scouts create through their careful analysis of defensive capabilities and limitations. The coordination suggests central command structure and extensive planning rather than opportunistic raiding based on immediate circumstances. Your position on the battlements provides clear view of enemy preparations, and what you see destroys any lingering hope for quick resolution through negotiation or intimidation. These aren't desperate raiders seeking easy plunder who might be discouraged by evidence of determined resistance. They're a well-organized army equipped for sustained siege operations against defended positions. Several ships carry what appear to be siege engines, catapults, and ballistia, designed to breach defensive walls through concentrated bombardment. Others are loaded with scaling ladders, bridging equipment, and specialized tools for crossing defensive barriers or exploiting structural weaknesses in fortifications. Most ominously, you can see large bundles of what might be incendiary materials, suggesting the attackers plan to use fire as both weapon and psychological tool. The sight sends chills through your body as you contemplate what fire could do to a community built primarily from wood and other combustible materials. The first arrows begin falling among the defenders before you fully realize that the attack has begun. The projectiles arriving with deadly precision that speaks of experienced archers who understand exactly how to maximize casualties, while conserving ammunition for sustained bombardment. These aren't random shots or warning volleys designed to encourage surrender, but carefully aimed strikes intended to clear specific sections of the palisade by killing or wounding defenders who occupy key positions. Men cry out and fall around you, some struck down instantly by arrows that find gaps in improvised armor, others crawling away trailing blood while trying to reach medical assistance. You duck behind the wooden barrier, your heart pounding so hard you're sure it must be audible over the sounds of battle that now fill the air with deadly music. This is nothing like the occasional training exercises the city has conducted over the years. Mock combats where everyone understood that mistakes wouldn't prove fatal and participation was voluntary, rather than mandatory for survival. This is chaos and violence and the very real possibility of death arriving faster than thought or prayer, reducing your entire existence to the immediate necessities of staying alive for the next few seconds while trying to contribute something useful to collective defensive efforts that seem increasingly futile. Return fire, Count Ragnar shouts, though his order seems almost absurd given the disparity in equipment and training between Viking professionals and Paris craftsmen pressed into military service. The defenders' bows are hunting weapons designed for taking deer and rabbits at relatively short ranges, not war bows capable of penetrating Viking armor at combat distances or delivering the kind of sustained volleys that might disrupt enemy operations effectively. You knock an arrow to your bowstring anyway, drawing back with muscle memory developed through years of hunting in the forests around Paris. The shot feels good as it leaves your bow, arcing high in what seems like perfect trajectory before splashing harmlessly into the river well short of its intended target. Around you, dozens of other arrows meet similar fates, falling into the water like ineffective rain that accomplishes nothing beyond demonstrating the defenders' determination while wasting precious ammunition that probably won't be replaceable once initial supplies are exhausted. The Vikings respond with another carefully coordinated volley that finds its mark with devastating accuracy. Each arrow placed with precision that reflects professional training and extensive combat experience. The man beside Gerard, the candlemaker whose shop sits 3 doors down from yours, staggers backward with an arrow protruding from his shoulder, blood flowing freely from a wound that might not be fatal but certainly eliminates his ability to contribute to defensive efforts. You help Gerard retreat from the battlements, improvising bandages from strips torn from your own shirt while trying to control bleeding that could prove dangerous if not addressed promptly. His wound isn't immediately life-threatening, but it's disabling, removing another defender from a force that was already inadequate for the task it faces. How many arrows do they have? Gerard gasps through gritted teeth, his question expressing the fear that haunts everyone watching the systematic bombardment that continues without any sign of slackening intensity. The question haunts you as you return to your position, understanding that the Vikings seem to possess virtually unlimited ammunition, while your own supplies dwindle with each defensive volley. Each wave of enemy arrows claims more defenders, gradually reducing the force available to resist the inevitable ground assault that will follow the artillery preparation. The mathematical progression is simple and terrifying. If the Vikings can maintain their current rate of casualties while suffering minimal losses themselves, they'll eliminate effective resistance before needing to risk their own forces in direct assault. The siege could be won through attrition alone, without requiring the kind of bloody close combat that might result in significant Viking casualties. The first siege engine opens fire with a thunderous crash that shakes the entire defensive wall, sending vibrations through the wooden structure that you can feel in your bones. A massive stone projectile smashes into the palisade perhaps 50 yards from your position, sending splinters flying like deadly rain while leaving a gap large enough for several men to pass through simultaneously. The impact demonstrates the overwhelming superiority of professional siege equipment over hastily constructed defensive works built by part-time volunteers using materials available locally rather than optimized for military purposes. What seemed like substantial protection yesterday proves pathetically inadequate against weapons designed specifically to destroy exactly this type of fortification. More catapults join the bombardment as additional siege. Engines are brought into position and crews complete their preparation for sustained fire. Each impact targets different sections of the palisade with methodical efficiency that suggests systematic plan for reducing the entire defensive perimeter to rubble before attempting direct assault. The wooden fortifications that seemed so solid and reassuring during peaceful times prove no match for professional siege. Equipment operated by experienced crews who understand exactly how to concentrate force for maximum destructive effect. Each stone projectile creates damage that would require hours to repair properly, while the bombardment continues without pause. Count Ragnar moves along the defensive line, trying to maintain morale as the situation deteriorates visibly around him with each passing minute. His presence provides psychological support, but courage alone cannot overcome the fundamental imbalance between professional attackers and amateur defenders equipped with inadequate weapons and improvised defensive positions. His efforts to encourage resistance become increasingly difficult as the evidence accumulates that determination and bravery, while admirable, cannot compensate for overwhelming disadvantages in numbers, equipment, training, and experience. The gap between Viking capabilities and Paris resources grows more apparent with each exchange of fire. They're landing troops. Someone shouts from a watchtower position, his voice carrying clearly over the sounds of bombardment and defensive activity. You look toward the river and see small boats pulling up to the island's shoreline at multiple points along the perimeter, their occupants leaping onto dry land. With practiced efficiency that speaks of extensive experience conducting amphibious operations, Vikings establish beachheads with mechanical precision. Their distinctive round shields and battle axes clearly visible even at significant distance. The site confirms that the palisade bombardment represents only one element of a coordinated attack plan designed to overwhelm defensive capabilities through simultaneous pressure at multiple points. The Vikings aren't simply trying to breach the walls. They're conducting a comprehensive operation designed to make continued resistance impossible through systematic application of superior force. The walls that were supposed to protect the city have become a trap, forcing defenders to face attacks from multiple directions simultaneously while preventing retreat or tactical repositioning that might allow more effective use of limited defensive resources. You realize with growing horror that the Vikings' strategy is more sophisticated than simple frontal assault against fixed fortifications. They're conducting a carefully planned operation designed to eliminate resistance through systematic application of overwhelming force rather than relying on single-point breakthrough followed by exploitation. The first breach in the palisade occurs at the eastern section, where concentrated catapult fire has reduced the wooden barrier to scattered debris that no longer provides effective protection against ground assault. Vikings pour through the gap like water through a broken dam, their war cries echoing across the island as they establish footholds inside the defensive perimeter. The breach widens steadily as more Vikings flood through, pushing back the defenders despite desperate resistance that costs lives the defending force cannot afford to lose. Each Viking casualty is quickly replaced by fresh fighters, while each defender lost permanently reduces the already inadequate force available to resist the continuing assault. Count Ragnar leads a desperate countercharge aimed at sealing the breach before it can be exploited to compromise the entire defensive line. You watch him disappear into the melee, his sword flashing in the morning sunlight as he cuts down the first Viking to reach the inner side of the palisade. His personal courage inspires the men around him to follow his example, throwing themselves into close combat with the desperate fury of people fighting for everything they hold dear. For a moment, the counterattack seems to slow the Viking advance, creating hope that determined resistance might yet save the situation. But for every raider that falls, two more take his place, fed from reserves that seem inexhaustible compared to the dwindling number of effective defenders. The breach widens steadily despite heroic efforts to contain it, and it becomes clear that the palisade cannot be held against such overwhelming numerical and tactical superiority. More gaps appear in other sections of the wall as siege engines continue their methodical destruction while ground forces exploit every weakness created by the bombardment. The coordinated nature of the assault prevents defenders from concentrating their limited resources at any single point, forcing them to spread thin across multiple threatened positions. Fall back to the inner defenses. The order comes from someone in authority or, not sure who, since Count Ragnar is no longer visible in the chaos surrounding the main breach, possibly wounded or killed during his counterattack attempt. The retreat is more controlled than you expected, suggesting that someone with military sense is coordinating the defensive effort and had prepared contingency plans for the failure of the outer perimeter. The survivors pull back toward the city center, abandoning the riverside positions to establish new defensive lines around the church and abbey complex. The withdrawal allows you to see the full extent of Viking success in overrunning the palisade. Enemy banners now fly from multiple sections of the captured wall, while organized units of raiders begin systematic advance into the city's residential and commercial districts. The outer defenses have been completely compromised in less than 2 hours of concentrated assault. As you run through streets you've known all your life, you're struck by how different everything looks when viewed through the lens of desperate combat and imminent destruction. Familiar buildings become potential defensive positions or obstacles to be avoided, depending on their strategic value and structural characteristics. Neighbors' homes transform into either shelter or traps, depending on their location relative to enemy advance routes and defensive positions. The geography of your daily life reshapes itself according to military necessities that override civilian purposes and personal attachments. The marketplace, where you've conducted business for years, now serves as a staging area for refugee movement and defensive preparations rather than commercial activity. Stalls that normally display goods for sale have been converted to barricades or supply depots supporting desperate resistance efforts. You reach the inner defensive line to find it already under preparation by someone who clearly understands military principles better than the amateur defenders who attempted to hold the palisade. Father Bernard has organized civilians into teams tasked with barricading streets and preparing improvised weapons from whatever materials can be salvaged or repurposed. The coordination suggests this retreat was planned in advance, a recognition that the outer defenses might fail despite best efforts to hold them. The inner defensive line represents a deliberate fallback position rather than improvised response to unexpected developments. Your new position provides clear view back towards the captured palisade, where Viking banners now fly from sections that you helped defend just hours earlier. The sight hits you like a physical blow, confirming that the first line of defense has been completely overrun, and that your community now faces the prospect of house-to-house fighting in streets where children played yesterday. Smoke begins rising from various points around the island as the raiders start fires, either deliberately as psychological warfare or as side effects of their systematic destruction of anything that might prove useful to defenders or valuable enough to justify transport to Viking territories. The smell carries clearly on the morning breeze: burning wood, burning thatch, and something else that you prefer not to identify, but that adds urgency to the defensive preparations that represent your community's last hope for survival as anything other than slaves or corpses. Altric, the voice calling your name, belongs to Master Gigom, whose bakery has been converted into an ammunition depot where civilians are creating arrows and crossbow bolts from whatever suitable materials can be found or improvised. You make your way to Guillem's position, dodging fallen debris and scattered equipment left behind in the retreat from the palisade, while trying to avoid areas where Viking advance parties might have established observation posts or sniper positions. The baker's face shows the strain of morning events that have transformed peaceful craftsmen into desperate warriors fighting for community survival. But his hands remain steady as he organizes the civilian supply effort that might determine whether continued resistance proves possible or futile. "We need men to help move supplies to the church," he explains quickly, pointing toward the abbey complex that represents the final defensive position where remaining civilians and defenders might make their last stand. Food, water, medical materials, anything that might help if this becomes a siege rather than quick assault. The work provides welcome distraction from the sounds of battle growing closer as Vikings consolidate their control over the outer sections of the island while preparing for final assault against whatever resistance remains concentrated around the religious buildings. Loading sacks of grain and barrels of preserved meat into carts gives your hands something useful to do while your mind struggles to process the collapse of everything you've known and the transformation of familiar surroundings into battlefield where survival depends on factors completely beyond your previous experience or preparation. The church bells begin ringing. Not in their usual pattern that marks religious observances or daily time divisions, but in the rapid, chaotic sequence that signals general alarm and calls for whatever help might be available from surrounding territories. The sound carries across the island and beyond, alerting any survivors in the countryside that Paris is under attack and cannot provide refuge or assistance to anyone else who might be facing similar threats. The bells represent both plea for help and acknowledgement that the city's ability to protect itself or others has been fundamentally compromised. You pause in your loading work to listen to those bells, wondering if this might be the last time. You hear them ring from towers that have stood for generations and seemed permanent fixtures of your world. The bronze that creates their distinctive voice was cast by craftsmen like yourself, ordinary people who believed they were creating something that would endure far beyond their individual lifespans. "Keep moving," Guillaume urges, though his voice lacks its usual authority and carries the strain of someone trying to maintain organization and purpose in circumstances that challenge basic assumptions about order and continuity. He's scared too, you realize. Everyone is scared, and that fear is starting to erode the discipline that has kept defensive efforts organized despite overwhelming disadvantages. Fear itself becomes another enemy that must be fought alongside the Vikings if any hope for survival is to be maintained. A new sound joins the cacophony of battle screaming from somewhere near the market square where you conducted business yesterday. Not the war cries of combatants engaged in honorable battle, but the terrified shrieks of civilians who have encountered Viking advance parties, now operating freely in the captured sections of the city. The reality of what defeat means crystallizes in your mind with devastating clarity that forces you to confront possibilities. you've been avoiding through focus on immediate tasks and desperate hope that somehow the situation might still be salvaged. This isn't just about losing your workshop or accumulated possessions. The Vikings aren't here to collect tribute and withdraw to their distant territories. They're here to take everything of value and destroy everything else, including the people who might resist their future plans for the region, or serve as examples to other communities considering resistance. You abandon the supply work and run toward your home, suddenly desperate to ensure your family's immediate safety, while some possibility of protective action might still exist. The streets between the church and your district have become a maze of barricades and defensive positions, forcing you to navigate carefully through improvised fortifications manned by neighbors whose faces show the same desperate determination you feel. The defensive positions represent final preparations for house-to-house fighting that will determine whether any civilians survive the fall of Paris with their lives and freedom intact. Each barricade has been positioned to channel attackers into killing zones where desperate resistance might extract some cost from Viking victory. But the defensive preparations also reveal how completely the situation has deteriorated. These positions represent last-ditch efforts to delay inevitable defeat rather than serious attempts to repel the invasion or maintain community independence. Your house appears undamaged when you reach it, though Viking forces control the riverfront area less than 100 yards away and could advance to your district within minutes if they choose to prioritize civilian targets over military objectives. Through gaps in hastily erected barriers, you can see raiders moving systematically through the captured district, kicking in doors and emerging with armloads of plunder, while showing no concern for defensive positions that might threaten their activities. Their confidence suggests they understand that remaining resistance lacks the strength to interfere significantly with looting operations. The Vikings are already treating Paris as conquered territory rather than active battlefield, where defenders might pose serious threats to their operations. Mildred meets you at the door, relief and terror warring in her expression as she pulls you inside and bars the entrance behind you. "Thank God you're alive," she whispers, her voice carrying the desperate gratitude of someone who has been contemplating worst-case scenarios while listening to sounds of battle growing closer. "We have to leave," you tell her immediately, the words tumbling out as you try to convey urgency while organizing your own thoughts about what departure might accomplish or where it might lead. The outer defenses have fallen completely. "They'll be here soon." She nods, indicating bundles already prepared and waiting by the door in anticipation of exactly this moment. Her preparations show that she's been following the battle's progress and understands what Viking success means for civilian families caught in areas that will soon be under direct enemy control. "Where can we go?" she asks, voicing the question that has been haunting your own thoughts as you contemplated evacuation options that seem to offer little real improvement over remaining in place. The bridges are destroyed, and they control the riverfront. There's nowhere to retreat. It's a question you've been avoiding because all potential answers involve terrible risks and uncertain outcomes that might prove worse than staying to face whatever the Vikings have planned for conquered civilians. But remaining in your home guarantees capture, while movement at least offers theoretical possibility of finding temporary safety. "The Abbey has the strongest walls," you say, finally, grasping at the only option that offers even minimal hope for protection. "If we can reach the inner courtyard, we might survive until help arrives from the mainland, or until the Vikings decide they've taken enough plunder to justify withdrawal." The plan is pathetic, even as you speak it. based more on desperate hope than realistic assessment of defensive capabilities or enemy intentions. But alternatives seem even worse when examined carefully, and any action feels preferable to passive acceptance of whatever fate Viking victory might impose. You gather your family and join the stream of refugees moving toward the island's center, carrying what possessions you can while abandoning everything else to whatever fate awaits abandoned property in occupied territory. Thomas walks beside you with the serious expression of a child trying to be brave, while Beatrice clings to her mother's skirts and peers around with wide, frightened eyes. The journey to the Abbey takes you through sections of the city that show increasing battle damage. As you progress toward areas where final resistance efforts are being organized, broken arrows protrude from wooden walls, bloodstains mark the cobblestones, and the smell of smoke grows stronger with every step toward what might be temporary sanctuary. Other families crowd the narrow streets, creating bottlenecks that slow movement to dangerous crawls, while exposing everyone to potential attack from Viking units that might be operating anywhere within the captured areas. Everyone carries hastily gathered possessions, and many support wounded relatives or neighbors who can barely walk but cannot be abandoned. The orderly evacuation planned by city leaders has devolved into desperate mob movement driven by panic and the basic survival instinct that overrides social organization when external threats exceed community resources for providing protection and maintaining order. Children cry for lost parents. Adults search frantically for missing family members, and the elderly struggle to keep pace with movement that cannot slow down to accommodate individual needs or limitations. The social fabric that normally holds communities together begins unraveling under pressures that exceed its capacity to maintain cohesion. You reach the Abbey courtyard as the first Viking war parties begin probing the inner defensive lines, testing for weaknesses that might allow quick breakthrough to the final stronghold, where remaining civilians have gathered in hope of finding protection that wooden walls and amateur defenders probably cannot provide. The massive wooden gates close behind you with finality that provides both relief and claustrophobia. Inside these walls, you're temporarily safe from immediate attack. Outside, the world you've known for 32 years continues its violent transformation into something unrecognizable and hostile to everything you've valued. The courtyard fills rapidly with refugees carrying tales of horror from the overrun sections of the city. Workshop districts gutted by fire while their owners were killed defending the palisade. Neighbors cut down as they tried to protect their homes and families. Children separated from their parents in the chaos of retreat and evacuation. Each story adds another layer to your understanding of what Viking conquest means for communities that resist rather than submitting peacefully to whatever demands the raiders might make. The systematic thoroughness of the destruction suggests that this invasion represents something more than typical raiding for portable wealth. You find space for your family against the Abbey's inner wall, settling onto cold stone with the peculiar exhaustion that follows extreme stress and the completion of immediate survival tasks. Mildred arranges your few remaining possessions around you like fortress walls, creating illusion of privacy and security in the midst of chaos that threatens to overwhelm individual identity. The stone walls provide genuine protection against fire and casual assault, but they also represent the final defensive position available to Paris's surviving population. If the Abbey falls, nothing else stands between your family and whatever fate the Vikings have planned for conquered civilians. What happens now? Thomas asks, his child's need for explanations. undiminished by circumstances that have rendered adult understanding inadequate for providing meaningful answers to questions about future possibilities. You look around the courtyard, taking inventory of your fellow refugees and their condition, while trying to assess what resources might be available for sustaining life during whatever siege might develop. Perhaps 200 people have found shelter here, representing maybe half the island's original population. Where are the others? Dead in the initial assault, captured during the retreat, hiding in ruins throughout the captured sections, or trapped in areas now under Viking control. The answers will determine what possibilities exist for eventual community reconstruction if Viking occupation proves temporary rather than permanent. The answer to your son's question depends on factors completely beyond your control or influence. Will the abbey's walls hold against siege equipment that destroyed the palisades so easily? Will the Vikings attempt to storm this position, or will they be content to control the rest of the island while waiting for starvation to complete their victory? Will help arrive from outside, and if so, when and in what form? The bells that rang this morning carried appeals for assistance. But surrounding territories faced their own threats and might lack resources for mounting relief expeditions against such overwhelming force. Now we wait, you tell Thomas, though the words feel inadequate even as you speak them. And we hope that help arrives before our situation becomes impossible to sustain. The afternoon brings new horrors as smoke columns multiply across the island and sounds of systematic destruction continue without pause or indication that the Vikings plan to preserve anything they don't intend to transport as plunder. From your position in the courtyard, you can hear buildings collapsing and materials being torn apart with methodical efficiency. The Vikings are systematically demolishing everything they don't plan to keep, creating wasteland that will never again support the community you've spent your life building and defending. Years of patient work and careful planning, destroyed in hours by men who value nothing but portable wealth and the pleasure of destruction. Your workshop is certainly gone by now, reduced to ashes along with your tools, materials, and all tangible evidence of skills and industry that defined your professional identity and provided foundation for family prosperity. The Abbey Commission that seemed so important yesterday morning has become irrelevant in circumstances where survival takes precedence over commercial obligations. Father Bernard moves among the refugees, offering what comfort he can provide. But his usual serene confidence has been shattered by events that exceed any theological framework he's prepared to address. How do you reconcile loving God with systematic destruction of Christian community by pagan raiders who seem to face no divine opposition? The presence of women, children, and elderly people in the Abbey courtyard poses moral challenges that have no clear solutions. These civilians cannot contribute to defensive efforts, but they cannot be abandoned without violating fundamental principles about protecting innocent life and maintaining community obligations. Yet their presence also compromises defensive capabilities by diverting resources and attention that might otherwise focus entirely on military necessities. Feeding and protecting non-combatants during siege conditions requires supplies and manpower that pure military logic would allocate differently. You hold your family close as darkness falls on the worst day in Paris's short history, knowing that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new horrors, and new impossible choices that will test every assumption about morality, survival, and what people will do when faced with circumstances that exceed their preparation and experience. Tonight, you're alive, your family is together, and the Abbey walls still stand between you and the destruction raging beyond. It's not much, but it represents hope that might sustain another day of existence in circumstances where each hour survived represents a small victory against overwhelming odds. The sounds of Viking celebration drift across the courtyard as the raiders enjoy their conquest, their voices carrying across stone walls that provide physical protection, but cannot block acoustic reminders of how completely your world has changed in the span of a single day. Tomorrow will test whether hope can survive another day of circumstances that seem designed to destroy everything that makes survival worthwhile. The screaming starts before dawn, cutting through the thin sleep that exhaustion had finally granted. Despite circumstances that make rest nearly impossible, you wake to Mildred's hand clamped firmly over your mouth, her eyes wide with terror in the grey pre-dawn light filtering through the Abbey's ancient windows. Around you, other refugees stir restlessly, disturbed by sounds that intrude into even the most exhausted sleep with their urgent message of human suffering that cannot be ignored or dismissed as nightmare. The cries continue beyond the courtyard walls, not the clean war shouts of Vikings engaged in honorable battle, but something far worse and more personal. The methodical, deliberate sounds of people being tortured for information, entertainment, or simply because their captors possess the power to inflict suffering, and choose to exercise that power without restraint or concern for consequences. The raiders have discovered survivors hidden in the ruins, and are extracting whatever value they can from their captives before disposing of them. You pull Thomas and Beatrice closer, covering their ears against sounds that no child should ever hear. But the screaming penetrates everything, echoing off the Abbey's stone walls until the courtyard itself becomes a resonating chamber for human agony. That speaks of the depths of cruelty that humans can inflict when all restraints are removed. The torture serves practical purposes beyond mere sadistic entertainment. The Vikings want information about hidden valuables, the location of additional survivors who might possess useful skills or ransom value, and details about the Abbey's defenses that might facilitate easier capture of this final stronghold. "They're not killing them quickly," whispers old Henrik, a fisherman whose knowledge of Viking raids comes from years of coastal trading that exposed him to communities that had survived previous attacks. "They want information first. Location of hidden treasures, number of defenders we have left, weaknesses in our walls that might be exploited." The implications hit you like physical blows, each realization adding another layer of horror to circumstances that already exceed your ability to process rationally. Those screams represent your neighbors, people you've known for years, being systematically brutalized to extract intelligence that will make the Abbey's capture easier and more complete. Master Guilam's voice, raised in agony that transforms the familiar baker into something unrecognizable. The candlemaker's wife, pleading for mercy that will not come. Children whose names you know, whose laughter filled your streets yesterday, reduced to sounds that speak of suffering beyond imagination. Each voice represents not just individual tragedy, but strategic intelligence that brings the Vikings closer to understanding exactly what they face in this final defensive position. How many fighting men remain? Where are the food stores located? Are there hidden passages that might allow infiltration or escape? Father Bernard kneels in the center of the courtyard, leading prayers that compete with the sounds from outside, his voice remaining steady despite sweat beading his forehead in the cool morning air. Even divine faith faces challenges when confronted with such immediate, overwhelming evidence of evil's power in the world. The prayers provide comfort to some refugees, while highlighting for others the apparent absence of divine intervention on behalf of the faithful. If God protects the righteous, why does systematic torture of innocent Christians proceed without celestial interference? The questions undermine religious confidence at exactly the moment when spiritual strength is most desperately needed. The torture continues for hours, sometimes fading to blessed silence before resuming with renewed intensity as new victims are discovered or previous subjects revive enough to provide additional information. Each fresh outbreak of screaming represents another neighbor discovered, another family destroyed, another piece of intelligence extracted that enhances Viking understanding of remaining opposition. You try to focus on practical matters, checking your weapons and planning defensive positions within the courtyard should the abbey's walls be breached. But concentration proves impossible when every sound from outside reminds you of the fate awaiting your family if this sanctuary fails to provide the protection you desperately need. The systematic nature of the torture suggests professional approach rather than random cruelty. The Vikings are conducting organized interrogation, designed to maximize information extraction while demonstrating to other potential captives the consequences of resistance or concealment. The psychological warfare proves as effective as physical violence in undermining defensive morale. Listening to neighbors being tortured creates anticipatory terror that weakens resolve and makes surrender seem preferable to enduring similar treatment. The screams serve as recruitment tools for collaboration and submission. Around midday, the screaming stops abruptly, leaving silence that somehow feels worse than the sounds of torture because it carries implications that no one wants to acknowledge explicitly. Either the Vikings have extracted all available information from their captives, or there's no one left alive to provide additional details about defensive capabilities and hidden resources. Both possibilities point toward the same conclusion. The final assault against the Abbey is coming soon. Armed with detailed intelligence about defensive weaknesses and supplied with comprehensive understanding of what resistance remains possible within these walls. The silence stretches on, creating tension that builds with each minute that passes without resolution. Are the Vikings planning their attack? Moving siege equipment into position? Conducting reconnaissance to verify information extracted through torture? The uncertainty amplifies anxiety beyond what direct attack might produce. They're studying our walls, reports Brother Marcus from his position at one of the Abbey's upper windows, his voice carrying the controlled fear of someone trying to provide useful intelligence while managing his own terror about what his observations reveal. You join a group of men climbing to elevated positions that provide views beyond the courtyard, hoping to gather information that might inform defensive preparations or reveal opportunities for escape that ground-level perspectives cannot detect. What you see confirms your worst fears about the Vikings' professionalism and thoroughness, while destroying any lingering hope that amateur resistance might prove effective against such systematic opposition. Small groups of raiders circle the Abbey like wolves studying prey, noting every detail of the fortifications with the patience and expertise of professionals who have reduced dozens of similar strongholds. They point out specific stones that might be loose or poorly mortared, sections where the walls show signs of age or weather damage that might be exploited, elevated positions that might provide advantageous angles for siege equipment or scaling attempts. Their observations demonstrate understanding of fortification principles that exceeds anything available to the amateur defenders. These aren't berserkers driven by bloodlust to throw themselves mindlessly against stone barriers. They're experienced siege specialists who have systematically reduced fortified positions throughout Northern Europe, accumulating knowledge and techniques that make them far more dangerous than simple raiders seeking portable plunder. The reconnaissance continues methodically, with different teams examining various aspects of the Abbey's defenses while others prepare equipment and organize assault forces according to information gathered through observation and torture. The coordination suggests central planning and unified command rather than improvised assault, based on immediate circumstances. "How long can we hold?" asks Master Gigom, though his question seems rhetorical given the evidence before your eyes and the professional competence demonstrated by enemies who clearly understand siege warfare better than the defenders understand defensive principles. Brother Marcus considers the question seriously, weighing defensive capabilities against attacking force while trying to provide realistic assessment without destroying what little hope might sustain continued resistance efforts. The walls are strong, built to last centuries rather than resist specific military assault, he says slowly. We have enough food and water for perhaps a week if we ration carefully and maintain strict discipline about consumption. But they have siege equipment, and we have no effective way to prevent them from bringing it to bear against our defenses. A week, the number hangs in the air like a death sentence, reducing your entire future to a period shorter than normal business cycle. No relief force can reach Paris in a week, assuming anyone even knows the city is under attack and possesses resources for mounting effective military response. The Vikings chose their timing perfectly, striking when seasonal factors disrupt normal communication networks and when regional military forces are scattered by agricultural demands that prevent rapid concentration of troops. Spring represents the optimal season for raiding precisely because it maximizes isolation of target communities. Maybe they'll be satisfied with what they've already taken, suggests someone, though the speaker's voice lacks conviction and his words seem to represent desperate hope rather than realistic assessment of enemy intentions based on observed behavior. You shake your head, remembering the systematic thoroughness you've observed in the raiders' operations throughout their conquest of Paris. They didn't bring an army this size just to loot workshops and burn houses. They want the island, all of it, complete control rather than partial victory. The afternoon brings confirmation of your assessment as Vikings begin assembling siege equipment within clear view of the Abbey's defenders, making no attempt to conceal preparations that demonstrate both their confidence and their systematic approach to reducing fortified positions. Catapults capable of hurling massive stones against walls that were built for durability rather than military resistance. Siege towers that will allow attackers to reach the top of fortifications while providing protection against defensive missiles. Battering rams designed to reduce the Abbey's gates to splinters through concentrated mechanical force. Watching these preparations, you're struck by the casual efficiency with which the raiders work, demonstrating professional competence that comes only from extensive experience conducting similar operations. They've done this before, many times, and they know exactly how to proceed through each phase of siege reduction. Every movement serves specific purpose in the methodical process of overcoming fortified resistance. Nothing is wasted or random. Everything contributes to systematic application of superior force designed to make continued defense impossible regardless of defender determination or courage. The sight of professional siege equipment eliminates any remaining illusions about your chances of successful resistance. The Abbey's walls, which seemed so solid and protective when you first sought refuge here, are inadequate against weapons specifically designed to destroy exactly this type of fortification. The first catapult opens fire just as the sun begins setting. sending a massive stone projectile crashing into the abbey's eastern wall with impact that shakes the entire structure. The collision sends vibrations through the stone that you can feel in your bones, while raining dust and small debris into the courtyard where refugees huddle in whatever shelter they can find. The impact creates visible damage to masonry that has stood for generations, demonstrating that even stone construction cannot indefinitely resist concentrated bombardment by professional siege equipment, operated by experienced crews who understand exactly how to apply force for maximum destructive effect. More siege engines join the bombardment as darkness falls, their impacts creating thunderous rhythm that makes sleep impossible and conversation difficult. Between the crashes, you can hear stone blocks shifting and mortar cracking as the walls gradually weaken under assault that continues without pause or consideration for civilian welfare. Each impact brings the walls closer to catastrophic failure, while creating psychological pressure that undermines defensive morale as effectively as physical destruction weakens defensive capabilities. The relentless bombardment serves both practical and terror purposes, wearing down resistance through combined physical and psychological assault. The eastern wall won't last the night, Brother Marcus reports after examining damage caused by concentrated catapult fire. They're targeting the same section repeatedly, trying to create a breach large enough for assault troops to exploit during ground attack. You spend the night moving between defensive positions, helping to shore up weakened walls and prepare improvised weapons for the ground assault that must follow the artillery bombardment. Your hands bleed from handling rough stone and splintered wood, but the pain provides welcome distraction from thoughts that offer nothing but torment. The work requires complete focus on immediate tasks, moving stones to reinforce damaged sections, preparing boiling oil for use against scaling attempts, organizing what weapons remain available for final defensive effort. Each task represents another few minutes of purposeful activity that delays having to confront ultimate questions about survival and defeat. Dawn reveals the extent of overnight damage while highlighting the futility of continued resistance against such overwhelming force. The eastern wall shows multiple gaps large enough for attackers to exploit, while debris from the bombardment has created natural ramps that will ease the Vikings' approach to weakened fortifications. More ominously, smoke rises from fires lit throughout the captured sections of the island, creating a wasteland that will never again support the community you've spent your life building and defending. The systematic destruction continues methodically, eliminating everything that might prove useful to future resistance or serve as foundation for community reconstruction. Your workshop is certainly gone by now, reduced to ashes along with the tools that represented years of accumulated skill and the materials that would have supported future prosperity. The Abbey Commission that seemed so important 2 days ago has become irrelevant in circumstances where survival takes precedence over all commercial obligations. The site should provide comfort, confirming that material losses, however devastating, pale in significance compared to threats against family survival and personal freedom. Instead, it deepens your sense of displacement, emphasizing how completely you've been severed from the world that shaped your identity and provided purpose for 32 years of productive labor. The final assault begins without fanfare or ceremony. Vikings simply appearing at the breaches in the abbey's walls like workers arriving to complete routine tasks. No war cries, no dramatic speeches, no ceremonial challenges, just professional soldiers doing their job with lethal competence developed through years of similar operations. The absence of theatrical elements makes the attack more terrifying rather than less. suggesting that the Vikings consider this conquest so certain that emotional preparation or psychological intimidation serves no useful purpose. They approach the abbey's capture as inevitable conclusion rather than challenging battle. You meet them at the largest breach, fighting with desperate fury of someone defending everything that gives life, meaning, and purpose. Your wooden staff proves surprisingly effective against Viking shields when wielded with strength developed through years of physical labor, while your knowledge of the abbey's layout provides tactical advantages that partially offset equipment disadvantages. But individual courage and local knowledge cannot overcome numerical superiority and professional training indefinitely. For every Viking you strike down, 3 more take his place, pushing steadily deeper into the abbey's inner defenses through sheer weight of numbers and systematic application of proven assault techniques. The defenders fall back from position to position, using the abbey's complex architecture to channel attackers into confined spaces where desperate resistance might extract maximum cost from Viking advance. Each corridor becomes battlefield, each room a fortress, each doorway a choke point where amateur determination confronts professional competence. But each retreat costs lives that the defending force cannot afford to lose, while the Vikings seem to possess inexhaustible reserves of replacement fighters. The mathematical progression remains brutally unfavorable, with defender casualties representing permanent losses, while attacker losses are quickly made good from reserves held for exactly this purpose. You lose track of time in the chaos of close combat, awareness narrowing to immediate necessities of survival, while larger strategic considerations become irrelevant in face of split-second decisions about weapon positioning and enemy movement. Block the axe swing, strike back at exposed ribs, dodge the spear thrust, keep moving, keep fighting, stay alive for 1 more second and then 1 more after that. The intensity requires complete physical and mental commitment, leaving no capacity for reflection about broader implications or alternative outcomes. Survival becomes purely mechanical process of reaction and counter-reaction, with consciousness reduced to basic functions that serve immediate combat requirements. When the end comes, it happens with shocking suddenness that leaves no time for preparation or acceptance. One moment you're fighting beside Father Bernard in the abbey's inner sanctuary, holding what you hope might be the final defensive line where superior numbers might be neutralized by confined space and desperate determination. The next moment, Vikings pour through 3 different entrances simultaneously, making continued resistance impossible through simple overwhelming of available defensive positions. The coordination suggests careful planning and professional execution rather than opportunistic exploitation of temporary advantages. Surrender, Father Bernard shouts, dropping his improvised weapon and raising his hands in universal gesture of submission. We surrender. No more killing. The words echo strangely in your ears, carrying finality that you're not prepared to accept despite overwhelming evidence that continued resistance would accomplish nothing beyond additional casualties among people who have already sacrificed everything for community defense. Surrender means the end of everything that has defined your existence: family, independence, professional identity, community membership, personal freedom, and control over fundamental decisions about daily life and future planning. The word represents transformation into property rather than person. But the alternative is immediate death for everyone in the sanctuary, including your wife and children who cannot defend themselves and depend entirely on adult decisions for their survival. The mathematics are simple and brutal. Surrender offers slim hope for continued existence. while fighting guarantees annihilation of innocent family members. You let your staff fall from fingers that suddenly feel nerveless, raising your hands in acknowledgement of reality that destroys everything you valued while offering the only possibility for your family's survival. Around you, other survivors make the same choice, accepting defeat even as it transforms them from citizens into captives. The Vikings accept the surrender with the same professional efficiency they've demonstrated throughout the siege, collecting weapons and organizing prisoners into manageable groups, while evaluating captives for potential value in slavery markets or ransom negotiations. The process reveals systematic approach to human resource management that treats conquered people as economic assets rather than enemy combatants. Each prisoner represents potential profit through labor, sale, or exchange, creating incentives for preservation rather than elimination of surviving populations. You find yourself standing in the courtyard where you sought refuge 2 days ago. But the space has been transformed into sorting area where Viking leaders evaluate their human spoils according to criteria that determine life, death, or various forms of servitude. The familiar stones remain unchanged, but their purpose has been completely redefined by conquest. Your family huddles beside you, miraculously unharmed despite experiences that would traumatize adults under normal circumstances. Their physical survival represents partial victory, but their psychological state shows evidence of damage that may prove longer lasting than any physical injuries they might have sustained. Thomas stares at the Viking warriors with mixture of fascination and terror, his 7-year-old mind struggling to process the reality of defeat and captivity while maintaining enough composure to avoid attracting unwanted attention from captors who might view emotional displays as problematic. Beatrice clings to her mother's skirts with desperate intensity, her 4-year-old understanding limited to recognition that familiar routines have been replaced by circumstances that feel dangerous and unpredictable. Her silence suggests psychological retreat from stimuli that exceed her capacity to process constructively. A Viking chieftain approaches your group, studying each person with calculating gaze of someone assessing livestock for breeding potential, work capacity, and market value. He's older than most of the raiders you've observed, his grey-streaked beard and extensively scarred face, suggesting years of successful campaigning and survival in profession, where longevity requires exceptional skill and good judgment. This is clearly someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions about conquered peoples. Someone whose evaluations will determine whether your family faces separation, enslavement, or immediate execution based on criteria that you can only guess at from external appearance and brief observation. His examination feels dehumanizing, reducing you from craftsman with accumulated skills and social position to potential commodity, whose value depends entirely on assessment by someone who views you as economic opportunity rather than human being with inherent worth and dignity. Craftsman, he says in accented but clearly understandable Frankish, pointing to several men including yourself, useful skills will live. Relief floods through you so powerfully that your knees nearly buckle from the sudden release of tension that has been building since the siege began. Whatever comes next, at least your survival seems assured, offering hope that your family might face future challenges together, rather than as separated individuals struggling with isolation and abandonment. But the chieftain's next words shatter that hope immediately, revealing that survival comes with costs that make victory indistinguishable from defeat in terms of what matters most about human existence and family relationships. Women and children remain here. Men come with us. The separation begins immediately, enforced by Viking warriors who show no interest in the emotional anguish their orders create among people whose family bonds represent the foundation of everything that makes life worth living. You're dragged away from Mildred and the children despite desperate struggles that accomplish nothing except earning painful blows from club and spear handles. The physical pain pales compared to emotional devastation of being torn away from people who define your identity and provide purpose for every aspect of your existence. The separation represents destruction of family unit that has sustained you through all previous difficulties and provided motivation for every sacrifice you've made. Your last glimpse of your family shows them huddled in the courtyard with other women and children, their faces reflecting the same bewildered terror. You feel as the fundamental structure of your world dissolves under pressure that cannot be resisted or negotiated. Mildred raises her hand in gesture that might be farewell or blessing, her lips moving in words you cannot hear over the Vikings' shouted commands and the sound of your own heart, breaking under pressure that exceeds anything you've previously experienced or imagined possible. Then they're gone, lost behind the abbey's walls as you're marched toward the riverfront and uncertain future that offers survival at the cost of everything that makes survival worthwhile. The distance between you and your family grows with each step, but the emotional separation has already become complete. The march to the Viking ships takes you through the ruins of your former life, forcing you to confront the complete destruction of everything you've worked to build over 32 years of productive labor and community involvement. Your workshop site is marked now only by smoking foundation stones that still radiate heat from fires that consumed your tools, materials, and accumulated evidence of professional competence. The riverside district where you've lived for years has been systematically demolished, with useful materials loaded onto ships for transport to Viking territories, while everything else has been burned to prevent future occupation by populations that might recreate the community you helped build. The Seine itself seems different, transformed from peaceful commercial waterway into highway for Viking conquest that has delivered devastation to every settlement along its course. Dragon ships line both shores, their holds filling with plunder taken from Paris and surrounding communities that offered resistance or simply possessed wealth worth taking. The scale of the operation becomes clear as you observe the results of coordinated raiding across the entire region, revealing that Paris's destruction represents just one element in systematic campaign designed to eliminate resistance while extracting maximum economic value from conquered territories. You're loaded onto ship with other captured craftsmen, chained below decks in conditions that make immediate escape impossible while ensuring maximum efficiency in human cargo transport. The vessel stinks of tar, salt water, and human misery. Its low-ceilinged cargo hold designed to transport maximum numbers of captives in minimum space with minimum concern for comfort or dignity. The chains represent more than physical restraint. They symbolize transformation from free citizen with rights and social position to property owned by people who measure human worth entirely in terms of economic utility and profit potential. Your identity as Uldric the craftsman dies with the application of iron shackles. As the ship begins moving downstream, carrying you away from everything you've ever known, toward future that offers existence without freedom. You try to maintain hope for eventual reunion with your family through ransom, escape, or negotiated exchange that might restore what Viking conquest has destroyed. But you understand the realities of slavery in Viking society well enough to recognize that such hopes represent psychological comfort rather than realistic planning for probable outcomes. Distance and time create barriers that become increasingly difficult to overcome as captives are integrated into foreign economic systems. Your life as Aldrich the leatherworker, respected craftsman and devoted family man, ended in the courtyard of the abbey where you surrendered to preserve your family's lives. What survives is something less than fully human. A valuable possession owned by men who measure worth only in terms of utility and profit potential. The river that once carried trade goods to your workshop now carries you toward future that offers survival without dignity, existence without freedom, and constant ache of separation from everything that once gave life, meaning, and purpose. The current that once served your commercial interests now serves your captors. Plans for extracting value from human resources acquired through conquest. 3 years have passed since the siege of Paris, though measuring time has become largely meaningless in your current existence, where days blend into each other without the natural rhythms of seasonal work, family celebrations, or community festivals that once provided structure and anticipation for the future. You work now in a Viking settlement, far from the Seine. Your leatherworking skills valued enough to keep you alive and relatively well-fed. But your status permanently fixed at the level of valuable property rather than respected. Craftsman with social position and economic independence. The settlement sits on a windswept coastline where the smell of salt water mingles with smoke from forges and cooking fires, creating